the Overman Warrior Podcast.
Hi, it's Rich Hoffman here. So in several discussions that I've been involved in that discuss the need for some regulation in Ohio legislatively to help protect businesses from what is quite obvious predatory practices. I have some personal experience on this, which is why it's up and why those conversations have been going on. It's not to penalize anybody from wanting to make money, but it's how do you make the money and to what effect. And I call this impairment strategy that is quite common, far more common than it should be. I call it the wounded deer strategy. And that's essentially if a financial institution, such as a bank, decides that they don't want to work with you anymore, I would relate it to a divorce. You decide that it's just not, they're not up to the same goals as the person they're lending money to. So in this case, maybe you're an aerospace contractor and you make parts for the defense industry. And the bank is out of progressive Chicago, and they decide that they don't want to support the Trump administration. Their executive level decision makers are leaning in the woke direction, and they just don't want to be related. They don't want to lend money to a defense contractor. And maybe you have some conversations where, just like in a divorce, you say, I'm going to take the kids, I'm going to take the car, I'm going to take the house, and you have one of those things. A bank or a financial institution of any kind should not have the ability to wound the other party, even because it may be personally driven or ideologically driven. They shouldn't have the legal means to hide malicious content and the desire to wound whoever they're antagonized by. They shouldn't have the ability legally to destroy that company. So when we talk about the wounded animal, that same company as a big deer. I've used this metaphor a few times when I've explained a case like this. You're a large deer and you got a lot of horns. You've been in the woods and you've managed to evade hunters for your entire life. So you're a very if hunters were to see you, they'd love to mount the head with the antlers on the wall, because it looks it'd be a great thing to brag about. So this animal, this large deer, this buck, has been running around the woods for many years, staying alive. But one day, he happens to be in the middle of the road, trying to cross a road to get to the other side, and he gets hit by a car. And his legs get broken in the back, and he can't crawl off into the woods to heal. So he's just laying there, wounded, can't defend himself, can't go hide. The car that hit him drives on and goes on down the road, and along comes a pickup truck full of people that have a cabin, and they would love to have a head of that big buck mounted on their wall full of antlers, and they could go tell some really great stories about how they were hunters of great renown, and they went out and found this buck and killed it and mounted it. Problem is, they found it it was roadkill essentially. The deer wasn't dead yet, but it was dying because it had been wounded. Well, how did it get wounded? And when we talk about, and I think the second part of it is where these private equity firms have really flown out of control, articulated well in this book, Plunder, which I will provide some further context. I found a nice review on Plunder where they talk about the details. I think everybody should read this book, especially if you're a legislator or if you're in the legislature. This is a book about how private equity has moved into essentially control our economy with trillions of dollars of gained assets. And they largely do it because either through regulatory mechanisms, and what comes to my mind on this kind of case is the first energy case in Ohio, where the second part of the story was bribery, corruption, legal problems. First part of the story was how did they get to be wounded to seek political affiliation? What made them want to go, hey, somebody help us? What was Obama era policies, regulations that were trying to put them out of business as a nuclear power provider because the government wanted to switch everybody over to renewables. They wanted wind, they wanted solar power. So government decided to create regulations that then torpedoed that market sector and to push them out of business. So it's a very common strategy, these things. And in the case I'm talking about, say you're, again, a bank, you're leaning the woke direction, and you decide, or maybe have a new CEO that comes on, or a new board that comes on that doesn't like Trump administration policies, don't like the suppliers of the defense industry. So how could you lash out at the Trump administration? Well, you attack the infrastructure that makes the things he wants to do. And if you put a lot of companies out of business in the process of doing that, a lot of sub-tier suppliers, what do you care if you're in control of the entire economy through banking anyway? So if logic would say, who wants to lose millions of dollars, knocking out a defense contractor? Well, if you make millions of dollars elsewhere and you have all these connections to all these backdoor private equity firms that are raking it and killing it, Blackstone comes to mind, and the buying up all the homes and then turning previous homeowners into renters, and then charging fees for everything that goes on. It's another mechanism of revenue stream that's out of control, and a lot of plundering is happening because there's no regulatory environment to keep everybody within the guardrails. So we're appealing to people's ethics, but I can say personally, how the deer get out in the road, in the case of what I'm talking about, well, when a trusted advisor, a banking institution, says, hey, on the other side of the road, there's some food, and you want to go across the road, and the big buck's thinking about it because he's pretty smart, and he didn't get that big rack because he fell for every hunter trick there was. Every hunter that was in some stand camouflaged from a hanging in a tree, been pretty savvy. That's why he managed to stay alive all this time. But the bank says, hey, over there, you can trust us. There's something over there you want. And so you go across the road, and then sure enough, here comes a car and hits the deer and breaks it, and he's wounded. And off goes the advisors who put the deer in a wounded position. And what I found out in my personal affiliations with this kind of thing is that this isn't unique. This is common. It's happening way, 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 way too much. So my advocacy is that there has to be some legislation that prevents that kind of activism from financial institutions in the state of Ohio. Because you always are going to have, whenever there's piracy somewhere, and this is modern piracy, this whole private equity buying up of assets that are destroyed by financial institutions, permanently wounded, whether by government, like in the Obama case in First Energy, or in the defense contractor case that I was talking about, where a financial institution, a very large one, that doesn't really care if it destroys a sub-2 supplier. It just has a problem with that supplier, likely due to politics. And they should not have, if they don't want to be a lender, then everybody should be able to get a divorce and have it be civilly discharged, but you shouldn't be destroying companies or trying to destroy companies that have people associated with them and do important work for the American infrastructure. Because you might not like the politics at the top of the ticket coming out of the White House. And the passive-aggressive way to deal with that is to undercut sub-tier suppliers to that supply chain in order to destroy the ability to even have it. So when you start getting all this global finance and finance people who don't really care about domestic American policies, and they happen to be running large banks, and you trust them because they're the ones that are giving you liquidity. But they have other ideas, and they become activists against what your intentions are. Once they find out they can't control those intentions, they use the mechanisms, because there's no legislative guardrails to keep them from doing it. They become activists that go to seek the destruction of your company. They send the deer out into the road so it can get hit by the car. And knowing that there's all kinds of private equity firms that are out there looking to plunder a wounded animal and hang the mounted deer on the wall with a big brack and put it in their portfolio and brag about it for the rest of their lives. No one has to know the real story. They'll just tell stories over some beer and nachos over football games and talk about that great hunt where they found that deer. And they'll never say that they found it on the side of the road wounded because some banking institution wounded them purposely to destroy them as a supplier. We have to put a stop to that kind of thing, and that's when I talk about legislative guardrails that don't exist. The reason why all this plunder is plundering at the rate that it is because financial institutions, they call it the playbook. It's an impairment strategy. They know if they want to, they can do just about anything they want because there's nothing to keep them from doing it. So I would suggest that at least in Ohio, probably nationally, but at least in Ohio, if people want to make a buck and trade baseball cards, trade companies, that's all fine and dandy. But you can't purposely destroy their value because you have a personal vendetta against them. And knowing that by destroying their ability to stay financially optimal, you wounded the animal so it can be plundered by those who are out there looking for easy roadkill on the side of the road. And when you don't protect companies and the people who invest in them, you don't do it with the understanding of longevity. You leave them vulnerable to plunderers in the private equity market that is exploding into the trillions of dollars right now. And it's probably one of the most unsaid things that is going on. And in politics, they put a lot of money into political campaigns. It's a tough call to make. But if you really want to have a thriving, good economy and you want to encourage people to go out there and start businesses, you got to protect them from becoming roadkill by a radical financial institution that does not have good patriotic grounding in the United States, but are involved in international finance. The bigger the bank, the more dangerous it is. And I would advocate that if you could, everybody should go to your local regional bank. Try to stay away from the big international banking firms. But when you're talking about large amounts of money that it takes to run a lot of these companies these days, the big banks have the resources, but they also have they don't have a lot of patriotism that are rooted in American ideology, and they might give money to campaigns, but they also give money to all the bad stuff too. And then behind the scenes, they act very proactively to destroy supply chains that are trying to advocate for the political movement that we're seeing right now under the Trump administration in the White House. It's certainly a problem, and that's why I suggest that there be some legislative guardrails to kind of discourage the open activism from large institutions from destroying private investment and then trading on the open market to these plunderers who are absolutely gaining market share of most of the economy right now in an unsaid way that's very dangerous for the future perpetuation of a growing economy. If there's a danger sign coming up, it's in who owns what and why and what they're willing to do with it as the owner of that investment. But no one cares more about those private investments than the people who are entrepreneurs who start companies. And those are the people we want to protect, especially in Ohio. And that's what legislative guardrails to discourage impairment strategies from large banks, all banks, but especially large banks, using it because there is no legislative recourse. It leaves them open to prey on the most vulnerable who are attached to them in ways that violates their fiduciary responsibility. And they will do it until they can't do it anymore by some legislative implementation that needs to be groundbreaking. And Ohio needs to lead that effort because it's happening everywhere. And we need to put a stop to it. Anyway, Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you ever read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. And it's something to seriously consider. And Plunder is a good book to get your mind wrapped around it. I'll put a short synopsis on my blog, so it makes it easy for everybody to kind of understand a 10-minute version what it's all about. But the details are quite ominous and certainly dictate that we deal with it politically before it is irreversible. Anyway, have a good day. See you later.
Thank you for listening.